Do have a seat. Recall for a moment, will you, one of those great Renaissance pictures of the Nativity with the Holy Family set against the incongruous, anachronistic, bleakly gorgeous backdrop of a dilapidated house or crumbling classical temple. As well as displaying virtuosity in the aesthetic crazes of their age, such painters are making some big theological points, which were not lost on St. Luke, that most painterly of the evangelists. On one level, the backdrop is suggestive of the old temple religion, which the gospel suggests had lost its way, and of which Christians believe the incarnate Christ is the fulfillment and true heir. On another, it suggests the shortcomings of the Gentile civilization into which Jesus was born. Paradoxically, of course, the Roman Empire was reaching its height, the summit of urbane civility, at the time of Christ, and later when the early church was finding its footing and fixing its scriptural canon. That these images of fragility and decay diagnose the moral rottenness behind Rome's marmoreal splendor. The yoke, the pointing finger, darkness, affliction, selfishness, hypocrisy, hunger. A compromised empire not so very different from the world we live in today. A vision of humanity as sadly recognizable to us as it was to the prophet Isaiah and to the Lord's own generation. But a world which the coming of Christ promised and promises to rebuild and refashion. Him, the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets, the fount of true life. St. Luke, author of this gospel, but also of the Acts of the Apostles, takes us on a spiritual and physical journey from the temple complex on Mount Zion, the city of the living God, in the first chapter of his gospel, all the way to St. Paul, preaching in Rome in the final chapter of Acts. Those haunted pictures I've asked you to imagine illustrate both the shortcomings and possibilities of both those worlds, and the light of Christ that St. Luke so firmly believes to be their remedy. We ought to be very careful about a simplistic reading of the Gospel's scene of conflict in the synagogue. The old dreary liberal take comes dangerously close to anti-Semitism, this idea that Jesus is merely criticizing legalistic religion in favor of a more relaxed attitude to Sabbath observance. In fact, the Lord redoubles and re-energizes the significance of the Sabbath. The point isn't lighten up a bit, you liturgy bores, these rules don't really matter, but rather remember what the Sabbath really points to and asks us to participate in and embody. Remember what it is we're commemorating and, crucially, what we're living out in this context, here this morning. Jesus' controversial healing of the crippled woman asserts his contiguity with the Creator, whose rest the Sabbath commemorates. It reminds us that he was party to the salvation of the Israelites brought out of bondage in Egypt. Throughout his gospel, the Sabbath is set up as the point of contention between Christ and the Pharisees by Luke. But his point is not that they're taking it too seriously, but rather not seriously enough. Sabbath observance is not a siloed part of our lives, or shouldn't be, but rather the fount that supplies our lives in their totality, supplying us with the attitudes of gratitude, grace, forbearance, generosity, expansiveness of heart, the attitudes that are the attitudes of the kingdom. The Lord's healing of the crippled woman on the Sabbath is not only permissible rule-bending, but entirely proper, to a day which commemorates the creation and redemption of the world out of love. We should be shaken by this gospel excerpt, shaken out of allowing our own Sundays, our Sabbaths, to become just rote observance, of course. But we needn't be, and indeed shouldn't be, ashamed of the formality and splendor of our worship here. And that's what we're best at as Anglo-Catholics in the Church of England. We've never been trendy, with the exception perhaps of Father Peter. We've never been chic. We've never been mainstream, thanks be to God. But we remind our brethren across the church of the centrality of the Sabbath. It's not so much a merely mouthed case I'm making for its relevance, that awful word, as to put it at the very heart of our experience as human beings, the people God has called us to be. Today on the Sabbath, in this liturgy, we are given a foretaste of the heaven to which we're all called. We're especially lucky in that respect here, and we must both give thanks for that and remember those for whom the beauty of holiness is less literal on a Sunday morning. But we're also mandated by the observation that all is not well in the world, and that our faith calls us, as St. Luke so relentlessly articulates, to live out the kingdom in the knowledge that it is in an important but mystical sense present to us now, making demands of each of us now. We are it in one important sense. We are at once commanded to step outside the faulty priorities of the age, to rest, to know ourselves as beloved, and at the same time reminded of how far this world is from God's vision for it, and how each of us have an uncompromising call to make that better in a small way. It's a covenant of our worth and belovedness, and a challenging reminder of the worth and belovedness of all humanity. It's the assurance of reward, as well as the commission to earn that reward. It's a day of rest, but a reminder of our exhausting call to build bridges, restore the streets, to nurture gardens, to extend hands and hospitality, and to live not for ourselves, but through loving his people, for him who made us and redeemed us out of love, in whom all is reconciled, all is rebuilt, and all is made whole. Amen.